There's something pretty incredible about wrestling. It's a weekly live TV show with like crazy stunts and these storylines that kind of span on for years and years and years. You can kind of say whatever you want about the endings being predetermined and like the scripts of who these characters are going to be, but like, I don't know, it's a TV show, you know? It's not supposed to be the NBA, even though it could be scripted, or like the NFL, which is scripted for sure. It's just like an hour of dudes yelling at each other and getting slammed, and that's kind of it. And it's in a way incredible, and also like the most stupid thing in the world, but it's great, you know? What got my juices flowing on this video was kind of our current movie state and how there aren't a lot of movie stars, but like the biggest one arguably is a former wrestler, The Rock. So like, how did he do that, and what kind of led into a WWE wrestler becoming one of the biggest movie stars in the world?
My mom did that last week. Whoa! He got for a full-on handstand! No way!
Wait.
Okay, I'm going to set this up first. So I'm going to do brief history, kind of go back to the olden days, and then go back to The Rock and John Cena and Dave Batista. That's our agenda for the day. There you go. I don't know if I'm going to put it in there in editing, but, you know, it'll be somewhere. So, as I said, the era that we're talking about, which is like modern wrestling, kind of starts in the 80s, when Vince McMahon bought the WWF from Vince McMahon, his father. Is he a Nepo baby? Now, Vincent K. McMahon, which is the Vince McMahon we know today, who is, you know, maybe a psychopath, and did just recently sell the WWE again, and we'll get into a little bit of that later. He bought the WWF with the idea of making it a national wrestling promotion. At this current point in time, there were a lot of wrestling promotions across the country, and it pretty much worked. They all had their own kind of stars. It was a pretty niche thing, generally. But Vince McMahon, our psychopath in chief, wanted to change that. And he did this with an eye on a star. He wanted to create superstars to market to the world and get people talking. So who did he start with? Hulk Hogan is an absolute icon. Bleach blonde hair, bleach blonde handlebar mustache. What's going on there? And his name's Hulk? Wild. That's just a wild thing. But the man's got one of the most iconic names in pop culture. It's like Elvis Presley. It's like Babe Ruth or Jackie Robinson or Bob Marley or like Angela Merkel. You know, it's just crazy how names like these are just gonna like be passed down for generations, and people are just gonna know them without having to like really engage with the work that they created. This is gonna be a very dude heavy video, and I'm sorry about that. But we're talking about the WWE. I don't know what to tell you. So to give an abridged history on Hulk Hogan. In 1982, Vince McMahon buys the WWF from his dad. Vince McMahon has the idea to bring Hulk in as his star. In 1982, Hulk's also in Rocky III, playing a character named Thunderlips.
I'm coming after you, Balboa.
The key to wrestling is getting wrestlers over, basically winning over the audience with the character that the wrestler is portraying. And Hulk does this by saving Bob Backlund from a beating in one of his early matches, and he becomes a fan favorite because I think Bob Backlund was a pretty popular wrestler. Then he fights a couple more times, and then he has a match against the Iron Sheik, which, if you don't know who the Iron Sheik is, he was basically a character from another country in the 80s when Hulk was basically just beating up people from other countries, like Russians and like people named the Iron Sheik, and he would just beat the shit out of them. And then America would go like, hell yeah, brother. And then that's just kind of it. But it worked, obviously, because the 80s was strange. It's a weird, wild time. So he beats the Iron Sheik in Madison Square Garden. And when he beats the Iron Sheik, the call comes over that says,
Hulkamania is here.
which is what Hulk Hogan is known for. The iconic wrestling action figures in that yellow and red. So Hulk Hogan is a star. And he was also on TV, he had some shows, he did some movies, but he wasn't like a movie star. What Hulk Hogan did was prove that the WWF could create a star that was world-renowned, everyone knew him by name, could sell merchandise, could be on TV, could be in movies, could do all of this stuff. He is the blueprint, or like the proof of this thing that Vince McMahon was trying to do. But here's the thing at this time with Hulk Hogan is wrestling is very much about personas. At this time, people thought Hulk Hogan was a man. Hulk Hogan is a character. But he had to keep playing Hulk Hogan in his everyday life. So when you see Hulk Hogan in a movie, he can't be a character actor. He has to be Hulk Hogan, which hinders him in a lot of ways. Number one, the acting that Hulk Hogan does is very different from the acting that an actor does. The way wrestlers act is for a crowd. It's kind of like theater, except it's a lot more like at 10 all the time and very aggressive and very macho. And that's kind of what Hulk had to do. He had kind of one gear, and that's okay, right? That's his thing. That's what he does. I don't think it matters that Hulk Hogan wasn't the biggest movie star in the world because he was like the biggest star in the world. But this is the prototype, right? This is the person that The Rock and John Cena have to thank for all their success later on. Okay, so let's move on to our next person. Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan kind of came up wrestling together. They wrestled each other many times. They were good friends in real life, but they were opposed in the ring. This rivalry between the two of them and their just kind of inherent star power made it so that on February 5th, 1988, 33 million people watched Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan wrestle. 33 million people. There's not a show on today that has 33 million people watch it, especially live. That is insane. So Andre the Giant, kind of like Hulk Hogan, is like incredibly iconic in just his physical build because he's just like, his thing is he's a giant. He's a massive man. So it's hard for him to like play characters and like hide himself. And Andre also didn't get to play a lot of characters, but he did get to play one character who is absolutely incredible. One of the best characters a wrestler has ever played, in my opinion. And that's Fezzik from The Princess Bride.
Probably he means no harm.
He's very, very short on charm.
I remember seeing The Princess Bride for the first time and seeing this massive man on screen and seeing that he's like a gentle, kind, intelligent person. And that's just also a great way to subvert what you would think he would be. You'd think this massive man is like a fucking murderer. He's insane. He's going to kill the people. He's going to kill who's ever on screen because, like, generally that's what big people do. But he's able to pull off this kind, sweet, intelligent character in a great way. And it makes the character better and it makes the whole movie better because he's in it, which you can't really say for a lot of roles that wrestlers have taken. In that way, Andre the Giant is a completely unique figure for this time because, in my opinion, a wrestler has never been so perfectly cast for a role since then. Okay, we're going to move on to our next person. Roddy Piper is one of the more iconic heels in wrestling. He makes wrestling feel like passionate and violent and like real in a sort of way, even though he's like wearing a kilt and shit. Like, Roddy Piper is just like an incredible character in wrestling. When Roddy kind of quit wrestling, he started to be in a lot of B and C movies. Like a lot, like so many. But he's in one of my favorite movies of all time, which is They Live. I think They Live is probably one of the greater works of science fiction and sort of like communicating these ideas about the world to people in a way that's like just incredible and I love. It's slow, doesn't age super well, but like I would recommend you watch it. Now the question is Roddy Piper a great actor? No, not really. But is he perfect to play this role in They Live? Yes, he is. He plays a drifter who's like just kind of going around trying to figure out what to do with his life in this weird time in the late 80s. And he ends up basically in this like homeless encampment in Los Angeles. And then he finds a pair of sunglasses that reveal the world to him, the truth of the world, which is that aliens have come down and taken over a lot of the media and stuff and pushed us into this world where the late 80s was, where it's like high consumerism, all this stuff, money, 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 that's all that matters. So he sees this and he tries to stop it. Does Roddy have the most range in this movie? No. But I think he's actually gotten a little better as he's gotten older, which is such a weird thing to say about a man. If you watch Always Sunny, you probably know Roddy Piper. He plays Demaniac in Always Sunny, the sort of like veteran. There's an episode where he tries to move in with the guys when they're trying to get him signed up for a pyramid scheme. He's pretty great in those movies. Okay, so those three guys that we just talked about are from the 80s, basically the start of wrestling as we know it. Now we're going to kind of jump a little bit to the late 90s, early 2000s. So in the early 2000s, the WWF formed WWF Films, which then changed to WWE Films, which then changed to WWE Studios, I believe. And this move is sort of like an extension of the SmackDown and Raw programs that were airing at the time, which were weekly television. The idea is to, I assume, parlay that popularity, because those shows were very popular back then, into movies, so you could like sort of feed wrestlers into movies and build them that way, and also build the show. I don't think it's worked quite as well as they would have hoped, because for most of the 2010s they've been releasing straight to video movies with names like The Countdown and The Marine 5 Battleground and Blood Brother, and they're all like, they've got like a wrestler in them as the main action guy, but I don't know. I don't think any of you have heard of any of those movies unless you're like a super wrestling fan. But then more recently, like end of 2010s, they got a little pickier with what they were doing. And then, as I mentioned before, they sold the WWE to TKO. So we'll see what TKO does with this in the future. So the first wrestler we're going to talk about from this sort of era is probably one of the most iconic wrestlers of the Attitude Era. I was trying to think of an analog for him because I know like my friends probably aren't familiar with Stone Cold Steve Austin. They probably aren't familiar with this analog too. But he's like the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar of wrestling, where he's got a really good case to be called the GOAT, but he's also not like shoving it in your face like Michael Jordan or LeBron are. And he was probably the biggest star of the late 90s. Now the Attitude Era is sort of wrapped up in a bunch of stuff. You know how like in the late 90s there were like a bunch of fucking weird movies that came out, and they're all about like, oh, the world's fucking crazy and like, oh, what's going on? We gotta break the system, and like all their music was like very rebellious. Well, wrestling followed suit. Here's the thing about the 90s that is like, you kind of need to know to understand the Attitude Era, is like the whole thing was kind of like, fuck the world, like what are we doing, like what's going on? So you get movies like The Matrix, you get movies like Fight Club, you get like Rage Against the Machine, you get all this kind of like countercultural stuff, you get grunge, all these things where like these Gen X and millennials were like, yeah, we're gonna fight the system, but like, then they didn't. So the character of Stone Cold Steve Austin, his purpose was to be like the Tyler Durden of the WWE, fighting against the system. He even like literally had matches with Vince McMahon. He beat the shit out of Vince McMahon a couple times.
Oh no! It's Austin! It's Austin! McMahon's in the cage with Austin!
Like this was his thing, and he was popular because this was his thing. He was fighting against the system. Since then, Stone Cold is not as visible, I guess, to most people that I talk to. I'm sure there are huge contingents of the middle of America, I guess, that are still interacting with some sort of Stone Cold Steve Austin content, but he didn't go into the stratosphere of like Hollywood and all these things, even though he might have been able to. I just think he didn't really care to. he did a couple movies.
Game on.
They didn't do super well, and it seemed like he just didn't like doing movies from everything I read. Which makes sense because, I don't know, it's kind of lame to do a movie in a way, even though I love them and I like to make them. Like, wrestling is so, like, visceral, and when you're an actor on a movie set, you're waiting around for a long time. And you're also, like, not really doing the stunts, you're not really doing any of the crazy stuff. So I understand why he wouldn't want to do this. And he also retired in 2003 from wrestling, full-time. And WWE Studios started in 2002. So he kind of, like, didn't line up perfectly with it. And if you look at Stone Cold now, he kind of just lives in Texas and, like, makes beer and seems to get married a lot for various reasons, which I'm not going to get into, but it's just like a weird rabbit hole, I guess, of his life. But the reason I wanted to include Stone Cold is because he essentially had everything lined up for him to be a movie star, you assume. And then he just didn't. And that's fine. You don't have to be a movie star. But the next guy did exactly what Stone Cold didn't do.
If you smell what The Rock is cooking.
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. The National Research Group released a survey that ranked Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as the second biggest box office draw behind Tom Cruise. I think it was last year, which is kind of insane. When The Rock started in WWE, he was playing this character called Rocky.
Blue chipper right there.
You know what? I have to agree with you, Jim Ross. I don't like you, but I gotta agree with you. Rocky Maivia is looking good.
And he was very much hated by a lot of the fans because they felt like they were pushing him onto them. And this has happened a couple times in the WWE. It's happened with Cena, it happened with Roman Reigns. This happens because the WWE has to make stars for the whole thing to work. So they have to, like, intentionally make stars for the whole thing to work. And the way to do that is to have them win and to try and get the fans to like them. At some point, there was a breaking point, and The Rock switched. He turned into, like, the character of The Rock that you see today with the people's elbow and the eyebrow and all this stuff. And he also became, like, a henchman sort of to Vince McMahon, which kind of aligns more with, like, what he does later on, where he's got, like, tequilas, he's in movies, he's doing all this shit. And I think he just had a bit more of a propensity to care about this stuff more than Stone Cold did. And WWE Studios launched with its first 3 movies starring The Rock. Now, they co-produced these movies with bigger studios, but it was The Scorpion King, the spin-off of The Mummy that everyone loves. He plays Matthias of Akkad, the villain of The Mummy Returns. You know, that guy is great. But it spawned a direct-to-video franchise for WWE Studios, so in a way it was successful in sort of like giving them IP to go on with. And then the next year, The Rock is in The Rundown. And in The Rundown, he plays a human man this time, not a Scorpion King, trying to find Sean William Scott in Brazil because he was paid to do it. And this is maybe one of the better Rock performances as a star. And you'll see why that stipulation comes in later. So The Rundown's, like, pretty successful. Then in 2004, they do Walking Tall, which is kind of the same thing, but Johnny Knoxville's his sidekick. It's okay. It does all right. Kind of gets obliterated critically. But Walking Tall did have 2 direct-to-video sequels starring Kevin Sorbo. So you tell me what's a success.
Not even the Mexican mafia or his own government.
This whole thing is part of the plan.
Can bring Nick Prescott down.
Since 2002, The Rock has been in a movie every year, except for 2020, when movies didn't really come out. He clearly wanted to be a movie star. Clearly not for a lack of trying. Like, he took a lot of, like, smaller parts, but then eventually built himself up into being one of the biggest stars in the world. The Rock's kind of interesting because he starts off with sort of these more kid-friendly movies, like The Tooth Fairy and Journey to the Center of the Earth, while also throwing in a couple, like, harder action movies in there, and then develops into being, like, kind of the star I think he wanted to be, this big buff action star. And is in like R-rated movies like Pain and Gain, directed by Michael Bay, and Baywatch, which is... It's Baywatch, you know? I've seen most of The Rock's movies, even the older kids ones, because I was a child then. And I think most of the time he's best when he's an addition to something. And the best way to show that is by looking at maybe his most famous role at his peak is when he's playing Hobbs as a side character in The Fast and Furious, which feels like a lot of stipulations. For example, in Fast 5 and 6, I think this is the best The Rock was in the franchise, and also probably some of his better stuff that he's done. Because he's not asked to do a lot, and that's a key with The Rock. For me, I don't think he can sell being a normal person, because obviously he's not a normal person. You know, he doesn't look like a normal person. He is 300 pounds of pure muscle, and also tall, and also like really handsome, I guess, too. And it just doesn't really work when you're trying to portray normal human emotions with a guy who is like a fine actor, but also has the body of like Hercules, which he did play and was not very good. And I think it's because he's got charisma, but he doesn't have charm, if that makes sense. I don't think The Rock could charm me in a movie. He could probably charm me in real life. You know, almost anyone could charm me in real life. But he can't really get that through the screen, partially because of how he stipulates his roles at this point with what they're going to be and how formulaic they are. But also because, like, no one's charmed by the high school bully, and he looks like the high school bully, and he kind of acts like the high school bully, because most of his jokes are about how much better he is than other people in the movie. Like, Baywatch is just him and Zac Efron dunking on people who are shorter, weaker, or women. And I think at this point, these, like, really broad roles with no, like, real emotional backing that he's playing, kind of wearing people out. Like, I'm sure people liked Black Adam and Red Notice and Jungle Cruise, but, like, there's no tension there. Because you also know, just by looking at the man, that he can get out of almost any situation that he is in. He's the most capable looking man who's ever been on a screen. So, like, when am I gonna feel drama or dread or, like, anything? He's obviously been incredibly smart with how he's crafted his career, which is why he's in the position that he's in, but I just think the roles are getting stale at this point. And I think The Rock has paved a path for the future of wrestlers becoming movie stars, because he proved that you can, like, legitimately do it, and there's, like, a fairly sustainable way to do it if you really want to be that. So, remember how we talked about the Attitude Era before? Its trademarks were that it was, like, sexual and violent and crazy. And they did this to fight against another wrestling company that was kind of coming up at the time, which was World Championship Wrestling, who went up against the WWE's Monday Night Raw with a show called Monday Nitro. And this show was pushing the limits, so they pushed the limits harder. Now, in 2002, around then, World Championship Wrestling goes under. So now the WWE doesn't have to push limits as far, and they can become a little more advertiser friendly. So they're still going to be, like, aggressive and violent and all this stuff, but they're going to cut down on the profanity and be a little more, how you say, PC in what they do and show, and, like, what the guys are doing on screen. And this also made them focus a little more the energy on the in-the-ring stuff instead of the out-of-the-ring stuff, because they were doing, like, crazy shit out of the ring, right? And then this era becomes defined by a man who we all know and who has an iconic song. John Cena's basically been the biggest wrestler since like 2004, 2006. And he was the most iconic wrestler of my generation when I was growing up. The song is incredible. He had like the catchphrases. He wore funny clothes. He was just kind of like the guy, you know? John Cena, you say John Cena, punch a kid in the back of the head, run off the schoolyard so the teachers can't catch you because now you're in international waters. Outside of the schoolyard, they can't catch you because you're outside the schoolyard. He had one of these things like with The Rock early on where it felt like they were pushing him to be something. And the character wasn't really connecting with audiences. John Cena's first character was called the Prototype, and he is described as a white rapper who wore jerseys, backwards hats, a chain with a padlock around his neck, and was also known as the Doctor of Thugonomics. And there are some clips of him saying things he shouldn't say.
Does that mean that you were responsible for showing Brittany how to run around all those nightclubs with no panties on, acting like a slut?
And then his persona starts to shift. So he goes from the Prototype to John Cena, this sort of like goody two-shoes Superman character, which is kind of like him going from young Mark Wahlberg to old Mark Wahlberg. But this character fits who he would be in the first movie he's in, which is the Marine, which is essentially just like a soldier who can't be killed in a way, not because of anything special, just because he's the guy in the movie. And the movie starts off with John Cena rescuing a group of soldiers from Al-Qaeda. They're gonna get beheaded by Al-Qaeda.
Allahu Akbar!
And then he rescues them, but then also gets kicked off the force because he disobeyed an order. So I guess this is what they were doing back then. I was 6 years old, so I don't really know, but this is insane, and I watched the start of it. It's on Disney Plus. So he beats Al-Qaeda, gets kicked off the military, goes home, has sex with his wife, and then kind of just does another mission, and there's a car bombing, and it's fucking weird. Now, this movie didn't do great at the box office, but it made $30 million in DVD rentals when it came out, which is insane. But I guess that was kind of when there was like a sort of working business model for movies where like they could make money after they were released in the box office, but I guess that doesn't really exist anymore. So then John Cena takes a turn in what he's doing, and he starts to do a little more kid stuff, like literally like Nickelodeon things. And he's in the Fred show and movies as Dad Figglehorn. And this change coincides with the WWE entering the PG era, where its television rating went from PG-13 to just PG, which means that it's more for kids now. So they have to kind of cut the inappropriate stuff out of it.
Rock is something you're not undisputed champion, so shut up, bitch.
For example, John Cena's finishing move was called the FU, and then it got changed to be the attitude adjustment, because I guess that's better for kids. And at this time, they also banned blading, which is when like they cut a little slit in their forehead, so there's blood gushing down. The WWE banned that. So, but you'd think that this would kind of be a death sentence on his career, as especially becoming a movie star. In 2015, he starts to be in adult comedies. So like Parks and Rec, he's in Sisters, that Tina Fey movie. He's in Daddy's Home for a little bit. But most importantly, he's in Trainwreck, which is what I remember him sort of like breaking through is the wrong term, but breaking through to like adults, where they were like, oh, he's like really good and he's really funny and he can play comedic roles. So why isn't he doing that now? I think his role in Trainwreck works because the comedy comes from him being much more vulnerable than he should be with a body like he has.
Listen, you always do this to me. You show up to these places, you put me in a situation. I'm a big guy. Everybody wants to fight the big guy.
Yeah, you are.
Hey, Mark Wahlberg, shut your bitch up.
Because you see all these guys who are these big macho men, and they don't scream emotional vulnerability. One of my issues I have with The Rock, he's not very emotionally vulnerable. But John Cena's in this movie as like kind of a big sad man, And this emotional vulnerability also undercuts the fact that he cannot be physically vulnerable no matter what you do. Because like The Rock, he is extremely capable looking. And then in 2018, he does Blockers, which again shows that he can even now lead a movie as a comedic engine and also like play this emotionally vulnerable character where he's worried about his daughter and like it actually sells.
I don't know. It's not, you know, I don't know. I'm just trying to be the best dad I can be.
And then between 2021 and 2023, John Cena appears in 10 movies, which is too many, I'm going to say. These movies include Vacation Friends 1 and 2, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, Barbie as the Ken Maid, Fast 9 and Fast X as Dominic Toretto's brother Jacob, The Suicide Squad as Peacemaker, and all 8 episodes of the Peacemaker TV show. So he's extremely busy, he's extremely visible, and he's in these big projects. And also, he's doing Wipeout too. He's hosting Wipeout.
Wipeout made me pee my pants a little bit.
It did?
And also he's going to China and doing weird things in China. And he's got 4 more movies that are currently filming or in post-production. Right now he's filming a movie with Idris Elba and Priyanka Chopra that's an action comedy, which is just like wild. Now here's the thing. John Cena got a lot of shit for joining Fast X, I think. People were like, oh, that's so stupid. Why would John Cena be in Fast X? I guess it just makes sense because like all that movie is about like big tough guys and like masculinity and all that stuff. And while I do agree, in a lot of ways, wrestling and Fast and Furious aren't that different. They're both essentially parodies of masculinity and action and big men save the day kind of things. And I think he works pretty well in Fast 9. Jacob Toretto in F9 is basically him kind of playing the Marine character that he played at the start of his career, who's like a dangerous person who you don't want to mess with and is serious and feels like he could kill you at any moment. In Fast 9, I think that's a good casting for him. As well, I think Peacemaker is also a good casting for John Cena because there's an emotional vulnerability to that character that he plays, and he plays it very well. I think the thing that's going to work for Cena, as opposed to The Rock, is that he doesn't take himself as seriously as The Rock. I think that's going to get him farther and make him more liked by general audiences than a man who is always invincible and always emotionally stable. But as an actor, those two men don't hold a candle to this next guy. Dave Batista debuted in the WWE in 2002. He came up with John Cena. He's wrestled against The Rock. He's done all this stuff. I remember the first time I heard about Batista because I was talking to a friend when I was like 11. And I asked him like, oh, who's your favorite wrestler? Like, who do you like? And he said Batista. And I was like, who the fuck's Batista? And that's not an indictment of Batista as a wrestler. He was great. He was very successful. He was the heavyweight champ for a while. But he just like wasn't John Cena, right? John Cena is massive. And he kind of will be massive for a long time. But Batista didn't have the song. He didn't have like the sort of iconic character that John Cena had. And there are a lot of huge wrestlers over the years that people just don't know. Batista's kind of like Tracy McGrady in the fact that he was incredible in his time in the WWE, but like not a lot of people think about him. And in a way, I think this helped him with the acting part because then he's essentially a blank slate for people. I don't think a general audience member could have picked him out of like a lineup in the Guardians of the Galaxy and been like, that's Batista. Like my mom didn't know who Batista was. I don't know if she does even now, but like I think the fact that he wasn't super iconic and also wasn't super tied to like his image of being a star, being the thing that makes him famous, helped him a lot. And another thing that I think has really helped Batista is that he kind of knows who to pick in terms of who he's going to work with. Batista's been in movies directed by Werner Herzog, The RZA, Sam Mendes, Peter Siegel, Zack Snyder, the Russo brothers, Taika Waititi. And then he shined in a couple collaborations, namely with Denis Villeneuve and James Gunn. The Guardians movies basically made him a household name. He imbued the Drax character until the writing got a little rough with the Drax character with a lot of internality, which not a lot of wrestlers can do.
I am hideous?
You are horrifying to look at, yes. But that's a good thing.
Oh?
When you're ugly and someone loves you, you know they love you for who you are.
And I think that's why he is such a successful actor, because he seems passionate about being an actor, not being a movie star. And then Denis Villeneuve is like maybe the greatest director of his generation. Batista's first collaboration with him is in Blade Runner 2048, where he basically opens the movie with a fight scene, but like he's incredible in it. He's like acting, you know? Whereas like The Rock and John Cena are being movie stars. In a way, he is being an actor. And then he also takes like a bit of a risky role with M. Night Shyamalan in Knock at the Cabin. And he plays this gentle and sort of kind but incredibly creepy man, which is just not a role that I think The Rock or Cena could have played.
What's wrong?
Nothing.
You'd think for an A-tier wrestler, compared to two S-tier wrestlers like The Rock and Cena, you'd think he'd get pigeonholed into like the direct-to-video action schlock thing, but he hasn't. And I think it's because he cares about being an actor. He really wants to be an actor. So, I think Batista is probably the best actor to come out of the WWE. Certainly not the most financially successful, not the biggest movie star, but he is the best wrestler turned actor that we've seen so far. And looking into the future, it's kind of hard to predict who will pop and be the next wrestler who turns into a movie star or an actor. I think general wisdom would say something like Roman Reigns, because he's the current star, he's the tribal chief, he's the biggest wrestler in the WWE right now. You could probably also look to someone like Sami Zayn, who's got a great personality and very well liked. And there are kind of two ways to go about it. You either really go into the acting part of it, or you develop your movie star persona. And I think Roman Reigns is probably the movie star persona route. He is also related to The Rock. It wasn't Hobbs and Shaw for, I think, that reason. Whereas Sami Zayn, I think, or someone like Sami Zayn, could become more of the actor route. And like I've mentioned a couple times, the WWE is going through an ownership change right now, which means that things are going to change. Whether that's how the movie studio works and who they push with the movie studio, if it even exists in the future, or who they push as stars. They just let go of a lot of people. I think like Dolph Ziggler is pretty good. He's been in a couple WWE movies. Or Elias, who I was always entertained by when I saw him in a match. I think he's like very charismatic. And then you've also got a bit of a younger generation of wrestlers coming up. You've got Austin Theory, who's like seemingly being positioned to be the star of the WWE in the future. He had a fight with The Rock. We'll see. I'm not going to be able to predict this. Just talking. If you watched this video, wild. Thank you. Appreciate it. If you liked it, you could like it. If you didn't, it's okay. Relax. You could also subscribe. And, you know, if you have something to say about wrestlers turning actors, you could let me know what you think. But, like, just be nice about it, I guess. I don't know. All right. Bye.